am a high-functioning depressive with a severe anxiety disorder, moderate clinical depression, and mild self-harm issues that stem from an impulse control disorder. I have avoidant personality disorder, which is like social anxiety on speed, and depersonalization disorder, which makes me feel utterly detached from reality. And sprinkled in like paprika over a mentally imbalanced deviled egg are things like mild OCD and trichotillomania, the urge to pull one's hair out, which is always nice to end on. In the first grade, I was diagnosed with a very severe anxiety disorder, and somehow I made it out of the darkness. Just like Jenny Lawson explains in her writing, Furiously Happy, anyone can make it out alive. Furiously Happy by Jenny Lawson. I've always been a fan of therapy. You spend an entire hour talking about yourself, and then someone has to fake pretend being interested about all the strange stuff that makes up you. I enjoy therapy so much that I'm constantly trying to get Victor to go, but he won't. So finally I said, we are going to marriage counseling. That way he'd have to go, and I could sit back and watch. But the shrink set it up so that he goes 1 week alone and I go the other week alone. How stupid is that? The moment Victor left for his appointment, I immediately thought of all the horrible things that he was going to tell her. He was going to ruin her chances of ever liking me. He was going to tell her the time that I surprised a funeral party. Well, the funeral wasn't really a surprise party. It was more of a surprise on me. Surprise! You're at a funeral! It's the closest I've ever been to a surprise party, with a lot more corpses than I'd expect. Finally, it was my turn to visit the counselor. I immediately launched into a speech about how Victor could not be trusted because who gets angry at you for attending a funeral? Crazy people who want to question your sanity. That's who. She interrupted me to tell me that Victor had only nice things to say about me, and that it was obvious that he adored me. Then I accused her of being a plant because the real psychiatrist would have known that Victor was faking it all to make me look gaslight crazy, but I am not crazy. Then she asked me this real blow-off question. Do you like your job? I replied with, if I were a serial killer, I'd leave all my notes on my victims, saying, I only stab jerks, so don't be a jerk and you won't get stabbed. Hugs, tiny babies. I think that's the best name for a serial killer because then the newspapers would have to be like, tiny babies still at large, protect yourself from tiny babies. I'm tempted to stop by that marriage counselor's office once in a while and tell her that we are still a happily married couple. But then again, she probably enjoys telling the rest of her clients that they are way better than the couple with the surprise funeral party story. I leave it alone because I'm a good person, at least according to my new therapist. When I went on my first antidepressant, it had the side effect of making me fixated on suicide, which is sort of the opposite of what you want. So I switched to something that did work. Lots of concerned family and friends felt that first medication's failure was a clear sign that drugs were not the answer. If they were, I would have been fixed. Clearly, I wasn't as sick as I said I was. And that sort of makes sense, because when you have cancer and the doctor gives you the best medicine and the tumor doesn't shrink immediately, that's a pretty clear sign you were just faking it for attention. And if it comes back, it's probably because you've been eating too much gluten, or you're not praying correctly, right? Well, no, but that same completely ridiculous reasoning is used for those with mental illnesses. Often we hear it from someone very close, very manipulative. We hear it from ourselves. Sometimes we listen to the small voice in the back of our head that's saying, this medication is taking money away from your family. This medication messes with your weight. This medication is for people with real problems, not just for people who feel sad, because no one ever died from being sad, except they do. And when we see it on television that celebrities have fallen to depression's lies, we think to ourselves, how could they have killed themselves? They had everything, but they didn't. They didn't have a cure for an illness that convinced them they were better off dead. I have lots of stories, and some stories aren't meant to be told. there was too much blood. I remember thinking that because I could feel it dripping down the back of my neck. I ran to go get a towel, applying pressure to the cuts along my scalp. I heard Victor ask me if I was okay. I was fine. I was fine? I was bleeding. Badly. And I felt relief. The pain in me was slowly floating away, making room for a pain so much easier to bear. The panic was fading slowly, and I could feel myself at ease. I told Victor that I was okay, that he could go back off to bed. But I already heard him fumbling with the lock outside of the bathroom door. I mean, it wasn't really a secret anymore. Victor had known that I had hurt myself for years, but it had never been this bad. I picked at my cuticles until they bled. But so what? So lots of people do, right? I picked at my scabs when I got nervous. Sure, it's gross, but it's not unusual. I pulled my hair out by the roots, and I couldn't stop myself until large handfuls were lying in my lap. I scratched at my scalp deeply with nails specifically filed for slicing. Victor would grab at my hands to keep me from doing it, but I couldn't stop it, and I couldn't even explain why. They said that the dark days were supposed to last just a few minutes, but they lasted way longer than that. And I couldn't get my mind out of things that were supposed to be sad, I guess. I have lots of stories, and some stories, like I said, aren't meant to be told. And then we started a very, very long extension of therapy, of drugs and meetings with doctors. Sometimes I felt impulses, the thought that I needed to itch or scratch, and they would just end with a twitch. And some nights I'd find myself hunched over the kitchen sink, crying pathetically as I forced myself to squeeze handfuls of ice until it burned like I'd stuck my arm in a fire. And sometimes I'd relapse. Sometimes Victor would find me the next morning with bloody hands, and he asks me, "Why can't you just stop? Why do I victimize myself intentionally?" And he looks at me as if I could actually explain. I can't even tell myself why I am this way. I just know that's how I'm made, and maybe, just one day someone will crack open this head of mine and tell me what's wrong in there. And also what's right. Because it's both, because without darkness there is no light, because without pain there is no relief, and I remind myself that I am so lucky to be able to feel such great sorrow and also such great happiness. Maybe the scales for emotions are different for me. Maybe mine are greater or less. And maybe one day someone will explain to me why I am the way that I am. Or maybe not. Because after all, some stories aren't meant to be told. To all who walk the dark path, brighter days are coming. Clearer sight will arrive, and you will arrive with it. The bright days might be for only a few moments at a time, but hold on and hold out for those days, because those days